The first time my son asked me for money, he was sitting across from me at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. His eyes were red. His voice kept breaking. And when he finally said, "Dad, my marriage is over," I believed every word. I believed him when he said he couldn't stay in the house anymore. I believed him when he said he didn't want to drag his wife through an ugly separation. I even believed him when he said the only thing he needed from me was help paying rent on a small apartment until he could get back on his feet. For 6 months, I paid that rent. Every month, I transferred the money without asking questions because I thought I was helping my son rebuild his life. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my daughter-in-law called me. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She sounded confused. "Mr. Hale," she said carefully, "why does Evan keep telling me you're having financial problems?" I stared at the phone. "I don't have financial problems." Silence. Then she asked a question that made my stomach tighten. "Then what apartment have you been paying for?" 3 hours later, she drove me across town. We stood together outside a building I recognized from the lease my son had shown me. I thought we were about to catch him living there alone. Instead, a woman I had never seen opened the door. A little girl stood behind her. The woman looked at me, then at my daughter-in-law. And before either of us could speak, she smiled nervously and said, "You must be Evan's family." She had no idea how right she was, and no idea how many different versions of that family my son had created. My name is Thomas Hale. I was 62 when this happened. My wife had passed several years earlier, so by then my family had become smaller than I ever expected. My son, Evan, was 34. He was my only child. Growing up, he had been the kind of kid who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave knowing everyone's name. He was bright, charming, quick with a joke, and almost impossible to stay angry with. That last quality worried me more as he got older. Evan had always been good at explaining things. Too good. When he missed a deadline, there was a reason. When he lost a job in his 20s, there was a reason. When he borrowed money and repaid it 3 months late, there was always a reason. But he had also grown into a man who seemed responsible in all the ways that mattered. At least I thought he had. He married a woman named Natalie when he was 29. I liked her immediately. Natalie was calm where Evan was impulsive. She worked in medical administration, kept careful schedules, remembered birthdays, and seemed to understand my son without trying to control him. They bought a modest home in a suburb about 40 minutes from me. For the first few years, everything looked stable. Then Evan started coming around alone. At first, I didn't think much of it. He'd stop by on a Saturday afternoon. Sometimes he'd help me with something around the house. Sometimes we'd grab lunch. But eventually, I noticed that he had stopped mentioning Natalie unless I brought her up. One evening, I asked if everything was okay. His smile disappeared. He looked down and said, "Not really." That was the beginning. Over the next month, Evan told me pieces of what he said was happening at home. He said he and Natalie had grown apart. He said they barely talked. He said they slept in separate rooms. He said she had become cold toward him and wanted space. I remember asking, "Have you tried counseling?" He shook his head. "She doesn't want to fix it, Dad." That hurt me. Not because I blamed Natalie. Because I knew what it felt like to build years of your life with someone and then imagine that person disappearing from your daily routine. I told Evan not to rush into anything. He nodded. Then one night, he showed up at my house carrying a backpack. He looked exhausted. "Can I stay here tonight?" "Of course." He slept in my guest room. The next morning, he came into the kitchen and told me he couldn't keep living at home. He said the tension had become unbearable. I told him he could stay with me as long as he needed. But he refused. "I need my own place." I understood that. Or at least I thought I did. A week later, he sent me a listing for a 1-bedroom apartment. Nothing fancy. Older building. Basic kitchen. Small living room. Rent was higher than I expected, but that was true almost everywhere by then. Evan said he could cover utilities and groceries, but he was already paying his share of the mortgage until he and Natalie figured out what to do with the house. Then he said, "I hate asking this. I knew what was coming." "How much?" He hesitated. "If you could help with rent for a few months, I'd pay you back when everything settles." I told him not to worry about repayment. He was my son. If his life was falling apart, I wasn't going to stand on the sidelines. That was how I became part of the lie. The lease was for 6 months. Evan emailed me a copy. His name was on it. The address was there. The amount matched what he told me. Everything looked legitimate. So I set up monthly transfers. At first, I checked on him constantly. "How's the apartment?" "Fine." "Need furniture?" "No." "Need groceries?" "I'm good." Sometimes he complained that the place felt empty. He said starting over was harder than he expected. He told me he missed having someone to come home to. Every time he said something like that, I felt terrible for him. I even offered to help pay for an attorney if the separation became complicated. He said they weren't ready for that. "We're trying to keep this civil." I respected him for it. Looking back, that's one of the things that hurts most. I wasn't simply fooled by my son. I admired him for the way he was fooling me. Meanwhile, I stopped calling Natalie. I didn't want to interfere. Before the supposed separation, she and I occasionally texted. She'd send pictures from family dinners. She'd remind Evan to call me. Afterward, I decided she probably wanted distance. Evan encouraged that. "Don't put her in an awkward position, Dad." So I didn't. For 6 months, I gave my son exactly what he needed. Money, trust, and silence. Then Natalie called me herself. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had just returned from a hardware store when my phone rang. Natalie's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought maybe something had happened to Evan. "Hello?" "Hi, Mr. Hale." She sounded nervous. "Natalie, is everything okay?" There was a pause. "Can I ask you something strange?" "Sure." "Are you having money problems?" I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I was confused. "No." "Why?" Another pause. Then she said, "Evan told me you've been struggling." My smile disappeared. "Struggling with what?" "He said your retirement income dropped unexpectedly. He said he's been helping you every month." For a few seconds, I thought I had misunderstood her. "Helping me?" "Yes." "How much?" She gave me a number. It was almost exactly the amount I had been sending him for the apartment. I sat down. "Natalie, Evan hasn't been giving me money." Now her voice changed. "Then why has he been taking that amount out of our account?" My chest tightened. "Because I've been giving him that same amount." "For what?" I should have answered immediately. Instead, I said, "I think we need to talk in person." She agreed. An hour later, Natalie arrived at my house. She walked in carrying a folder. She placed bank statements on my kitchen table. Month after month, I saw withdrawals from their joint account. Not rent payments. Transfers into another account. The dates were usually within a day or two of my payments to Evan. I looked at her. "I've been paying rent for him." Her face went blank. "Rent where?" I gave her the address. She stared at it. Then she whispered, "He doesn't live there." I asked her what she meant. Natalie looked almost embarrassed. "Evan lives at home." My mind rejected the sentence. "He told me he moved out 6 months ago." "He's never moved out." "He said you're separated." "We're not separated." "He said you sleep in different rooms." She looked at me with disbelief. "No." I felt heat rise into my face. Natalie opened the folder again. She showed me pictures from recent months. A family barbecue. A weekend trip. Evan standing beside her in their backyard. Then she showed me a receipt from a restaurant dated 3 weeks earlier. Their anniversary dinner. I stared at the receipt so long that the numbers blurred. So you're telling me everything he said was a lie? Natalie's eyes filled with tears. I was about to ask you the same thing. Then she told me her side. For almost a year, Evan had been claiming that I was becoming financially unstable. He told her I was too proud to admit it. He said I needed help with property taxes, repairs, medication for ordinary age-related issues, and basic expenses. Because of that, Natalie never questioned the money leaving their account. She thought her husband was supporting his father. I thought my son was surviving the end of his marriage. Evan had turned both of us into evidence for the other. To me, Natalie was the reason he needed money. To Natalie, I was the reason money was disappearing. Neither of us had spoken directly because Evan had carefully convinced both of us that doing so would be disrespectful. Natalie looked at the apartment address again. We need to go there. I wanted to say no. Some part of me still wanted an explanation that didn't destroy everything. But I grabbed my keys. The apartment building was 25 minutes away. During the drive, neither of us spoke much. I kept thinking about all the possible explanations. Maybe Evan was subletting the place. Maybe he had gotten it for a friend. Maybe he was using it as an office. Each possibility sounded weaker than the last. When we arrived, Natalie parked across the street. This is definitely the address? Yes. We walked up together. Apartment 3B. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. Finally, footsteps approached. The door opened. A woman in her early 30s stood there. She had dark hair tied back and wore casual clothes, like she'd been relaxing at home. Behind her, a little girl sat on the floor drawing. The woman looked at Natalie first, then me. Can I help you? Natalie asked. Does Evan Hale live here? The woman's expression softened instantly. Oh, you're Evan's family? My heart began pounding. Natalie didn't answer. The woman looked at me. You're his uncle, right? Uncle. That word nearly knocked the air out of me. I said, I'm his father. Her smile disappeared. She looked at Natalie. And you are? Natalie stood completely still. His wife. The woman grabbed the edge of the door. For several seconds, no one moved. Then the little girl behind her said, Mom? The woman quickly told her to go to the bedroom. When the girl disappeared down the hall, the woman looked back at us. Her face had gone pale. He told me he was divorced. Natalie's voice barely came out. He isn't. Then the woman turned to me. He told me his father died 8 years ago. That was the moment I realized the apartment wasn't the biggest lie. I was. Her name was Marissa Cole. She didn't invite us inside immediately. I didn't blame her. For all she knew, we were part of some strange confrontation. Eventually, she stepped aside. We entered. The apartment looked fully lived in. Not temporary. Not like a place my son visited occasionally. Men's shoes were by the door. A jacket I recognized belonged to Evan hung from a hook. There were framed pictures on a shelf. Evan and Marissa at a park. Evan with Marissa's daughter. Evan sitting at the same dining table where we now stood. Natalie picked up one photograph. Her hands were shaking. How long? Marissa answered. Almost 2 years. Natalie closed her eyes. 2 years. Long before the supposed separation. Marissa said she met Evan through work. He told her his marriage had ended years earlier. He said his former wife lived in another state. Natalie was sitting 3 feet away listening to herself being erased from her husband's life. Then Marissa told me what Evan had said about me. According to him, I had been a difficult father. Controlling. Distant. He said we hadn't spoken in years before my supposed death. He claimed he had grown up in a troubled home and had spent most of adulthood trying to escape it. None of that was true. Was I a perfect father? No. But I attended every school event I could. I taught him to drive. Helped him through college. Loaned him money for his first car. Stood beside him when he married Natalie. And now I was hearing that my son had buried me in a fictional past because a dead father was easier to explain than a living one who might expose him. Then Marissa said something that made everything worse. Evan told me this apartment belonged to him. I looked at her. He said he paid for it. She nodded. He said he wanted a place for us to build our future. My money had funded that future. Marissa wasn't simply someone Evan was secretly seeing. He had created an entire identity with her. He told her he had been divorced for nearly 5 years. He claimed he had no children. He said Natalie had left him after a difficult marriage and refused contact. He told Marissa that most of his relatives were gone or estranged. That was why she had never met anyone. Whenever Marissa pushed him, he said family relationships were painful for him. He turned questions into wounds. And because she cared about him, she stopped asking. Then she showed us something on her phone. A photograph of Evan at her daughter's school event. He was standing beside the girl with one hand on her shoulder. The caption Marissa had posted called him, "The man who showed up when we needed someone." My stomach turned. Evan hadn't only lied about his family. He had positioned himself as a wounded man who had finally found the family he deserved. He had made Natalie the villain, me the dead father, and himself the survivor. Marissa sat down. "I've been saving money." "For what?" Natalie asked. "A house." Natalie's eyes snapped toward her. Marissa continued. "Evan said once the lease ended, we'd start looking. The 6-month lease. The one I had paid. My son hadn't needed temporary shelter. He had needed 6 months to make his second relationship feel permanent." Then Marissa said, "He told me he was selling property he inherited from his father." I felt cold. "What property?" She looked at me. "Your house." I stood up so quickly the chair scraped across the floor. "My house isn't for sale." Marissa looked terrified. "That's what he told me." "When?" "A few months ago." I asked exactly what he'd said. She told me Evan claimed that after I died, he inherited my home. He said there were legal complications, but once the property was sold, he would have enough for a down payment. I couldn't speak. My house was the place where Evan grew up. His height marks were still faintly visible inside a hallway closet. There was a dent in the garage wall from the first time he tried parking after getting his license. Every room held some piece of our family history, and my son had already converted it into imaginary cash. While I was still living in it, Natalie suddenly asked, "Has he shown you paperwork?" Marissa hesitated. Then she went to a drawer and returned with several printed pages. Most were generic real estate estimates. But one page made me freeze. It contained my property address. Below that was an estimated sale value. At the bottom, Evan had written, "Available after estate transfer." Estate transfer. I read those words 3 times. That was no casual lie. My son had built a financial plan around a future event that had not happened. And according to the story he told Marissa, it already had. Natalie stared at me. "I think we need to find out what else he's been saying." I agreed. But first, we had to decide whether to confront him. Marissa wanted answers immediately. Natalie wanted proof. I wanted something impossible. I wanted the son I thought I knew to walk through the door and somehow explain why none of this meant what it obviously meant. He never did. We decided not to contact Evan that night. Instead, we compared everything. Texts, bank records, dates, stories. It was disturbing how carefully the lies fit together. When Evan told me he was spending the weekend alone in the apartment, Natalie believed he was visiting me. When he told Natalie he had to help me with something, Marissa believed he was traveling for work. When he told Marissa he needed space because talking about his family history was painful, he was often at home with Natalie. Every person in his life had been assigned a role. We just didn't know we were acting. Then Natalie found something. She searched old messages from Evan. 8 months earlier, he had asked her for a scan of their marriage certificate. At the time, he said he needed it for an insurance update. She sent it. Weeks later, he asked for an old photo of himself from his 20s. She thought it was nostalgia. Marissa interrupted. He showed me that picture. We looked at her. He said it was taken after his divorce. It had actually been taken before Evan and Natalie ever met. That was when we understood the full pattern. Evan wasn't improvising. He collected pieces of his real life and rearranged them into a fictional biography. Real photos. Real addresses. Real financial information. False meaning. Then I remembered something else. Several months earlier, Evan had asked to borrow a box of old family photographs. He said he wanted to scan them. I never saw the box again. I looked at Marissa. Has he ever shown you pictures of his childhood? She nodded. My stomach sank. Did he tell you who was in them? Yes. And who did he say I was? She hesitated, then answered. He said you were his mother's brother. My son had edited me out of my own family without changing the photograph. The next morning, I texted Evan, "Come to my house tonight. We need to talk." He replied almost immediately, "Everything okay?" I stared at those two words. He had no idea his separate worlds had collided. I wrote, "Just come over." He arrived shortly after 7. Natalie's car was parked around the corner. Marissa hadn't come. We had decided her daughter shouldn't be anywhere near the confrontation. Evan walked into my living room and immediately sensed something was wrong. "What happened?" I pointed toward the chair across from me. "Sit down." He did. I placed the lease agreement on the coffee table. His face barely changed. "What about it?" I went there. That changed him. Not dramatically. Just enough. His shoulders tightened. "You went to my apartment?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because your wife took me." Silence. I watched my son's face transform. Not into guilt. Into calculation. His eyes moved slightly, as though he were deciding which lie to protect first. Then Natalie walked in from the hallway. Evan stood. "Natalie?" She held up one hand. "Don't." He looked at me. Then her. Then the lease. Finally, he sat again. I asked, "Who's Marissa?" At first he said nothing. Then he rubbed both hands over his face. "Dad, this is complicated." "No. It's detailed." "That's different." He looked at me sharply. I continued, "You told me your marriage was ending." He swallowed. "You told your wife I needed financial help." "Nothing." "You told another woman that Natalie was your former wife." His jaw tightened. "And you told her I was dead." That finally broke his composure. He looked away. I asked the question I had been thinking about all night. "Why did you need to erase us to become whoever you were with her?" Evan started with excuses. He said he never planned for things to go that far. He said the relationship with Marissa began when he and Natalie were going through a difficult period. Natalie interrupted. "What difficult period?" He looked annoyed. "That year was hard." "For who?" "For both of us." Natalie laughed once. Not because anything was funny. Because his answer was ridiculous. "You were planning a vacation with me while telling another woman we were divorced." Evan looked at me. "Dad, I know how this looks." "How it looks?" I pointed toward the lease. "I paid for an apartment where you were building a life with someone your wife didn't know existed. I was going to pay you back. You think that's the problem?" He went silent. Then he tried another explanation. He said Marissa had been through a difficult relationship before meeting him. She had trust issues. He didn't want to scare her away with family complications. So he simplified things. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You simplified me into being dead?" He winced. "That came out wrong. It came out exactly how you designed it." Then Natalie asked something I hadn't considered. "Why tell her your father was terrible before saying he died?" Evan looked at her. She continued, "You didn't just remove him. You gave her a reason not to ask about him." That silence told us she was right. Every lie had a purpose. And suddenly, something changed inside me. Until that point, a part of me had still been speaking to my son. After that, I was speaking to a man whose strategy one was beginning to understand. I asked Evan about my house. His face changed again. What about it? You told Marissa you inherited it. He stared at me. Then he whispered, She showed you that? Yes. He stood and started pacing. That was when his panic finally appeared. He wasn't panicking about hurting us. He was panicking because information was moving between people he had kept separated. I asked again, Why my house? He didn't answer. Natalie did. Because he needed a believable future. Evan stopped pacing. She looked at me. If he told Marissa he was divorced but had no savings, she'd eventually wonder why. He needed something big coming later. I looked at Evan. Is she right? He sat back down. After nearly a minute, he nodded. And then came the part one will probably remember longer than anything else. Evan admitted that Marissa had started questioning why their relationship wasn't progressing. She wanted stability. She wanted to know whether he was serious. He couldn't bring her around his real family. He couldn't introduce her to friends who knew Natalie. So instead, he created a future built on delays. The apartment was supposed to prove commitment. The imaginary sale of my house was supposed to explain where their future down payment would come from. And the tragic family history? That explained why Marissa should never expect to meet the people who could contradict him. It was an entire system. Not one affair. Not one bad decision. A system. I asked, And what were you eventually going to do when the house never sold? He stared at the floor. I hadn't figured that out. For the first time that night, I believed him. Because people who build lies rarely plan the ending. They just keep extending the middle. Natalie wasn't finished. She placed her bank statements in front of Evan. Tell him where our money went. Evan didn't respond. She turned to me. The money he said was for you? He wasn't saving it. I looked at Evan. Where did it go? He rubbed his forehead. Expenses. What expenses? Marissa's daughter had needed after-school care. Evan helped pay for it. He bought furniture for the apartment. He paid utility deposits. He covered part of Marissa's car repair. He paid for weekend activities. None of those things were wrong by themselves. What made them wrong was where the money came from and what everyone had been told. My money paid the apartment. Natalie's household money supported the life happening inside it. Two families were unknowingly financing a third story. Then Natalie said something quieter. You told me your father was embarrassed. Evan looked at her. You said he hated needing money from us. I stared at my son. That hurt in a different way. He hadn't only made me poor. He had made me ashamed. He had given Natalie a fictional version of me who needed help but didn't have the courage to ask. I asked him, Did you ever think about what she'd believe about me? He whispered. I was trying to keep everything together. No. My voice stayed calm. You were trying to keep everything separate. That was the difference. And it was the truth. For a while, nobody spoke. Then Evan looked at me and said something I should have expected. Dad, help me fix this. I actually thought I'd misheard him. Fix what? All of it. Natalie stared at him. He continued, I'll end things with Marissa. Natalie stood. That's your solution? I made a mistake. A 2-year mistake? He ignored her and looked at me. I'll pay you back. Again with the money. He still believed money was the center of what he'd done. It wasn't. Money can be repaid. A false history is harder. He had taken my relationship with him and rewritten it for his convenience. He had taken his marriage and erased it for another woman. He had taken Marissa's trust and built it on sympathy she would never have offered if she knew the truth. Then Evan asked me for something worse. Please don't talk to Marissa again. I stared at him. Why? Let me handle it. That sentence told me exactly what he wanted. More control. One final chance to decide what everyone knew. What are you going to tell her? that things changed. Things didn't change. She discovered the truth. He became frustrated. You don't understand what she's been through. I stood. And she didn't understand what you were doing because you made sure she couldn't. He looked at me desperately. Dad, you're my father. I know. Then act like it. That sentence landed harder than I expected. Because for 34 years, being his father had meant protecting him whenever I could. But standing there, I realized he was asking me to confuse protection with participation. Evan left my house angry. He said I was judging him before hearing his side. I reminded him I had spent 6 months hearing only his side. That was how we got there. The next morning, I received 3 calls from him. I didn't answer. Then a message. Please don't destroy my life. I stared at it for a long time. It was an extraordinary sentence considering how many lives he had already destabilized. Natalie called later. She told me she was staying with her sister for a while. She hadn't decided what she would do about the marriage. I told her whatever she decided, I wouldn't pressure her. Then Marissa called. She asked one question. Was anything he told me about his childhood true? I could have protected Evan. I could have softened everything. I could have said families were complicated. Instead, I answered carefully. Some details were real. The story connecting them wasn't. She started crying. Not loudly. Just the quiet sound of someone realizing memories she treasured had been staged. She told me Evan had contacted her. He claimed Natalie and he had been emotionally separated for years. He said I was technically alive but had been absent enough that he considered me gone. Another revision. Another version. I told Marissa I wasn't going to tell her what decision to make. But I would answer any factual question honestly. That became my line. Not revenge. Not humiliation. Truth. For the first time in months, my son would no longer control which version of reality reached which person. A week later, Evan came to my house again. This time, he looked different. Not defeated. Just exhausted. He brought the box of family photographs he had borrowed months earlier. He placed it on my table. I thought you might want these back. I opened the box. Everything seemed to be there. Then I noticed small sticky notes on several photos. Evan had labeled them for Marissa. One picture showed me standing beside him at his high school graduation. The note said, Mom's brother. Another picture showed my late wife hugging Evan after college. The note said, Aunt Claire. I had to sit down. My wife had loved that boy more fiercely than anyone I knew. And years after she was gone, her own son had demoted her to an aunt in a fake family history. I looked at Evan. Why her? His eyes filled. I needed the story to make sense. That answer broke whatever remained inside me. Not because he hated us. That almost would have been easier. He had reduced us because it was convenient. I told him, Your mother didn't spend her life raising you so you could turn her into a supporting character in a story you invented. He looked down. For once, he didn't argue. Then I asked him something that had been bothering me. Did you ever love Marissa? He whispered. Yes. Do you love Natalie? Another pause. Yes. I shook my head. Then you've spent 2 years proving that love without honesty can become selfishness. He started crying. I had seen my son cry before. As a child. As a teenager. At his mother's funeral. Every instinct in me wanted to move toward him. I didn't. Some moments require comfort. Others require consequences. Evan asked if he could stay with me. Natalie didn't want him home. Marissa had told him never to return to the apartment. For the first time, the man who had maintained multiple versions of home suddenly had nowhere to go. I told him he could stay for 3 nights. After that, he needed to make his own arrangements. He looked shocked. You have 3 bedrooms. That isn't the point. I'm your son. I know exactly who you are. He flinched. I regretted the cruelty of how that sounded, but I didn't take it back. Then I explained my conditions. I would not lie to Natalie. I would not lie to Marissa. I would not tell relatives a softened version designed to make him look better. I would not give him more money. And I would never again allow him to use me as an explanation for where money went. He listened silently. Then he asked, "So you're choosing them over me?" "No." I looked directly at him. "I'm choosing not to help you deceive them." He shook his head. "You don't understand what that does to me." I answered, "I finally understand exactly what helping you has been doing to everyone else." That ended the argument. He stayed 3 nights. On the 4th morning, he packed his bag. Before leaving, he stopped by the front door. "Are you ever going to forgive me?" I didn't have a clean answer, so I gave him the only honest one. Forgiveness and trust are not the same decision. Then he left. Natalie eventually filed for divorce. It wasn't immediate. She spent months deciding. I respected that. Marissa ended her relationship with Evan the day she learned the truth. She later sent me one final message thanking me for answering her questions without trying to excuse him. I never saw her again. The apartment lease expired 2 months later. Evan handled the final payments himself. I did not reimburse him. I did not rescue him. He moved into a small place much farther from his old neighborhood. For several months, we barely spoke. Then he began calling occasionally. At first, every conversation felt careful, almost formal. He stopped asking for money. Stopped giving me elaborate explanations for everything. Sometimes he'd start defending what happened, then stop himself. Eventually, he began saying something different. I lied. Not. I was confused. Not. My marriage was complicated. Not. Things got out of control. Just. I lied. That mattered. It didn't repair everything. But it was the first sentence that didn't require another person to carry part of the blame. One afternoon, nearly a year after the apartment door opened, Evan came over. We sat at the same kitchen table where he originally told me his marriage was ending. For a while, neither of us mentioned the past. Then he looked around the room and said, "I told Marissa this house was already mine." "I know." He swallowed. "I think about that a lot." "So do I." He looked embarrassed. "I don't know what kind of person does something like that," I answered quietly. "The kind of person who becomes more afraid of losing a lie than losing the people inside the truth." He nodded. He didn't argue. That mattered too. For months, I kept asking myself the same question. How could I have missed it? I knew my son. Or I thought I did. But eventually, I stopped asking that question. Trust isn't stupidity. Loving someone doesn't make you foolish because they decided to use that love against your judgment. The mistake would have been discovering the truth and continuing to protect the lie. That's the part parents don't talk about enough. When your child is young, protecting them feels simple. You keep them safe. You stand between them and danger. You help when they fall. But children become adults. And sometimes the danger isn't happening to them. Sometimes they're creating it. Then protecting your child means something completely different. It can mean refusing to hand them money. Refusing to repeat their excuse. Refusing to attack the people they hurt. Refusing to turn family loyalty into permission. I still love my son. That never disappeared. But when I look at him now, I no longer confuse love with certainty. I know he is capable of kindness. I also know he is capable of deception. Both things can be true about the same person. And rebuilding our relationship has meant accepting both. The apartment taught me something else too. For 6 months, I thought I was paying rent so my son could start over. I wasn't. I was paying for a room where he could temporarily keep 2 versions of his life from touching. But lies have doors. Eventually, someone knocks. And sometimes the most painful moment isn't discovering what's behind that door. It's realizing the person you trusted most had been depending on you never opening it. My son once asked me whether I chose his wife and Marissa over him. I didn't. I chose something harder. I chose to love my son without becoming an accomplice to the man he had decided to be. And if I had to make that choice again today, I would make exactly the same one. Because family should be a place where the truth has somewhere to stand. Not a reason to hide it.